All right, welcome to this explainer. We're going to completely unpack the massive 1400-year historical journey of the Quran's compilation. We'll be exploring the really intricate relationship between its physical written history and its rigorous oral preservation. It's honestly an incredible detective story, one that spans all the way from the deserts of 7th century Arabia right up to modern printing presses. Let's kick things off by challenging what we think we know. Right? If you walk into a bookstore or a mosque anywhere in the world today and pick up a printed copy of the Quran, you'd probably assume that the physical book in your hands is just, well, a direct photocopy of a 7th century manuscript. But the historical reality, it's a lot more complex and honestly, way more fascinating. So we really have to ask, where does that physical text you're reading actually originate? Well, get this. The modern baseline for the text is actually a 20th century standardization. Yep, 1924. Under the auspices of King Fuad in Egypt, a committee of scholars at Al-Azhar produced what's known as the Cairo edition. This specific printing standardized the 114 Sutta format and, well, it was wildly successful. It went on to form the basis for the vast majority of Qurans read globally today. Now, it wasn't the very first printed Quran, but it absolutely became the definitive standard. Here is our roadmap for today. We're starting with the modern standard, then discovering ancient manuscripts, digging into the consonantal skeleton, exploring the power of oral tradition, and finally, merging text and voice. Okay, Section 1, the modern standard, the 1924 Cairo edition. So about this 1924 edition, the scholars didn't just pull a dusty 7th century manuscript out of a vault and take pictures of it. Actually, quite the opposite. They synthesized a bunch of different elements. They based the text on a highly specific oral recitation known as Hafs on Asim. And for the physical written form, they actually relied heavily on a 19th century manuscript by an Egyptian scholar named al-Muqallil-Tadi. Plus, they consulted medieval treatises on Quranic sciences by earlier scholars like al-Dani. The wild part is they largely ignored the ancient physical codices sitting in museums, literally building the text from living tradition and medieval scholarship. Moving right along to Section 2, Discovering Ancient Manuscripts, the Historical Reality. Let's do a quick time travel back to the early milestones of codification according to Islamic tradition. Prophet Muhammad passed away in 632 AD. At that point, revelations were mostly kept in memory or jotted down on scattered materials, stuff like parchment, stone, and palm leaves. A couple of years later, around 634 AD, the first caliph Abu Bakr ordered an initial compilation. But the real game changer happens around 650 AD. That's when the third caliph, Uthman, commanded a standard written version to unify a rapidly expanding empire, and he actually ordered divergent copies to be destroyed. Now, when we look for monumental early manuscripts today, it's just stunning what has actually survived. I mean, we have the incredibly old Birmingham fragments. There's the Sana'a palimpsest in Yemen, which is super interesting because it famously shows an erased underlying text. And then you've got these massive, nearly complete codices like Surah Medina 1a, the top copy manuscript in Istanbul, and the famous Samarkand Kufic Quran. The sheer volume of early manuscript evidence here is totally unparalleled for late antiquity. And the signs backing these discoveries? Absolutely astonishing. Get this. Radiocarbon dating verifies with a 95.4% accuracy that the parchment of those Birmingham fragments was created between 568 and 645 AD. That places the physical material incredibly close to, or maybe even right during, the Prophet Muhammad's actual lifetime. But here's the major twist that researchers run into. Despite all this incredible preservation, no single 7th century manuscript matches the modern 1924 printed edition in every single orthographic and diacritical detail. They just don't. The ancient books look fundamentally different from the books we print today. And to understand why that is, we've got to look at the Arabic language itself. Which brings us to Section 3, the consonantal skeleton, the evolution of Arabic script. Okay, so early Arabic wasn't written at all like it is today. It started purely as a rasm, which is just a bare consonantal skeleton without any dots. Imagine reading without being able to tell if a loop was a B, a T, or a Thi. Later on, scribes introduced ijam. Those are the consonantal dots used to distinguish similar-looking letters. And finally, much later, they added tashkil, which are the tiny strokes representing short vowels that dictate precise pronunciation. But those oldest manuscripts, they're mostly just that bare rasl. You can probably guess the problem here. Without dots or vowels, a single written word created immense ambiguity. For example, a bare skeletal word in an ancient manuscript could legitimately be read as Malaka, which means he possessed, or Malaka, meaning it was possessed, or even Malik, meaning king. This is the smoking gun that proves exactly why a physical text was completely insufficient on its own to preserve the exact message. All right, Section 4, the power of oral tradition, breathing life into the text. To solve that massive ambiguity problem we just talked about, we have the concept of Qira'at. These are highly rigorous, formalized methods of oral recitation. Because the early text was just a dotless skeleton, it absolutely required living human beings to pass down exactly where the vowels and dots belonged. These recitations traced back through unbroken oral chains to master scholars and, according to tradition, straight back to the Prophet himself. Basically, the oral tradition provided the flesh and breath that the written skeleton lacked. And because of this living tradition, the Quran actually exists in multiple valid canonical oral forms based on geography. Take the Hafs recitation, for instance. It's known for its clarity and phonetic simplicity, and it became globally dominant after being picked for that 1924 Cairo edition. But travel over to North or West Africa, and you're going to hear the Warsh recitation, which has totally distinctive vowel slantings and different rules for pausing. Both of these are perfectly authentic, parallel oral traditions that map seamlessly onto the exact same ancient consonantal skeleton. This leads us to our final part, Section 5, merging text and voice, the dual-track preservation. So the compilation of the Quran wasn't just about throwing together a book. It was a highly sophisticated dual-track preservation. Think of it like a giant puzzle. The physical skeleton, the res, locked in the rigid structure. But it completely required the flesh and breath of the oral recitation, the Qira'at, to actually come alive and be understood accurately. Literally, one cannot exist perfectly without the other. There's a great quote by scholar Adrian Brockett that hits the nail on the head. He notes that the static written text and the dynamic oral recitation work side by side as an ultimate safeguard. The written text stopped the oral storytellers from adding or subtracting chapters over time. At the exact same time, the oral tradition stopped scribes from misinterpreting a dotless, ambiguous skeletal word. They functioned as a brilliant master check and balance system against each other. So ultimately, when we look back at the 1924 Cairo edition today, we really see it for what it is, a reconstructive triumph. It's this brilliant synthesis that merges hundreds of years of precise, living oral traditions with the early written skeletons recorded in medieval manuals. It is not just a photocopy of a single ancient relic. No, it's the culmination of a dual-track preservation system that's been going strong for 14 centuries. I want to leave you with this final, kind of provocative thought to ponder as we wrap up this explainer. When you study the anatomy of this remarkable historical text, if a book lives equally in the static ink on a page and in the living breath of a reciter, which one is the true original? Thanks so much for joining me on this deep dive. I really hope mapping it out like this helped bring this incredible history to life for you.